We've been talking a lot about the new book, Greedy Bastards, written by your friend and neighbor, well, me. And maybe we've given you the impression that greed is a bad thing. Or that, you know, but there are ways to structure the natural human tendency to acquire things into a greed that could actually be good for America, where you can only make money by actually solving a problem. It's about bringing out the long-term greed in every American, and explicitly those who invest money. They should only be able to make more of it if they are aligned in their interest with those they are investing with. How do you do that? Well, we've got the sheriff of Wall Street, the former attorney general and governor of the state of New York, Eliot Spitzer, breaking it down. How are you?
Dylan, always great to be here. Congratulations on the book. It is spectacular. Buy it. You heard it from me. Buy it.
Thank you. Listen, that's a huge validation, actually. But it's interesting. In the commercial, you were watching the mob segment, and you were attorney general in this state.
Yep.
Tell me what you were telling them. Tell them what you were telling me.
Here's what I said to you off the record before we began. Before I was AG, I was a line assistant to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I prosecuted Tommy Gambino on the famous line, every time I try to get out, they keep pulling me back in. I've always thought that was Tommy, the son of Carlo. Really, the Michael Corleone figure, I thought, was Tommy Gambino.
Okay.
The similarities and parallels between the way organized crime, and you were beginning to allude to this, the way organized crime would squeeze money out of a sector. And to a certain extent, what Wall Street has become, there's more there than just sort of a metaphor for the moment on TV. Each has figured out how do you use leverage, how do you organize in a way to eliminate competition? Because the mob was at its most powerful when it became a monopolist. Antitrust violations, Wall Street, the same thing. Violations of fiduciary duty, conflict of interest, they squeeze all the money out, even though it doesn't, as you just said, doesn't serve their client or the public at large. Parallels there that really should be developed. Yeah. Fascinating metaphor.
Well, obviously, as long as you and I keep showing up to work, we can extend that conversation.
That's right.
I want to read just two paragraphs from the conclusion of the banking chapter of Greedy Bastards, which is basically my assertion of how you align those interests and get both your assessment, and then I want to know whether this is actually happening. Say the financial markets need regulation the way a nuclear power plant needs a cooling agent for its radioactive fuel rods. If safety rules are enforced and the heat of the rods is properly controlled, the result can be clean, abundant energy. But if that cooling process is neglected, there could be a meltdown. Similarly, capital requirements, having money required from the bank, are the cooling agent of risk-taking in the economy. And just as nuclear fuel will always be reactive, people will always have a tendency to be greedy. We need to enforce rules to balance natural greed with capital requirements so that greed can create productive risk-taking and competition, not short-term extraction. Fair assessment?
Not only fair, it is a brilliant metaphor, and here's why. I and many others had always said, look, a football game without referees becomes mayhem and a mob, and you don't want that. Your metaphor is much better because people appreciate with a nuclear power plant without coolant, the cataclysm that results is really big. So I think your metaphor is exactly right. You and I, and this is a point that I think bears repetition, we are capitalists. We believe in capitalism, competition, and people trying to get rich. That's good. It's a question, as you say, of having the coolant, the referees, the rules to make sure it is done the right way.
And the coolant, the right way, very simply, is you, if you want to buy something, should have some money to purchase it. You, if you want to lend money, should actually have money that you can lend. Fair?
Well, look, Dylan, I always say the three letters you have to understand Wall Street are OPM, other people's money. As long as Wall Street is merely a mechanism to play with other people's money.
Like our pension funds.
Like our pension funds, or where they are doing everything without, the whole issue of extending mortgages without skin in the game, to use the street vernacular, so that you take enormous risk because somebody else is bearing the burden and you only get the upside. Then you get an imbalance and a disequilibrium, crisis, nuclear meltdown.
Have we done anything since 2008 to restore the water in the reactor in order to, because the other side of the nuclear meltdown metaphor is a properly cooled reactor where you've got everybody working together, investors, entrepreneurs, students, educational universities, senior members of society, advising, teaching people like me and younger and down the line, and me teaching them, that you're in a situation now where everybody's aligned and you're going in that direction, and you get that with capital requirements. Are we doing that?
we're beginning to take very tiny steps in the right direction. And I think that's why your book is so good, because it really explains the framework and gives people a prism through which to understand it. Basel III, to kind of use the jargon, yeah, it's better.
Basel III is the standard that international banks and American banks use for capital standards.
Right. Now, interestingly, most of the good stuff has come from overseas. The Europeans, and I gathered last night watching Mitt Romney, the last thing you want to be is a European these days. That somehow you turn into...
They've got more upward mobility than we do, I hate to tell you. It's gotten that bad.
And lower unemployment, at least in Germany. But put that aside. The European banking structure is going through a more fundamental restructuring. In England, they're actually going back, or proposing to go back, to a pre-Glass-Steagall era, or Glass-Steagall era, where you take out the investment banking, the commercial banking, which would be an important, real manifestation of the Volcker Rule done right.
So one issue is the Volcker Rule and the reestablishment of the capital requirements and putting the water back in the reactor so that it can generate clean, abundant energy as opposed to melt all over us and create unemployment and poverty and horror. Another part of that is we've created some some fuel rods, if you will, that I will call the swaps market, that are very toxic fuel rods. Specifically, everything else in the world, stocks, bonds, commodities, oil, whatever it is traded on an exchange in public. I can see what it is. And yet we have a $708 trillion swaps market, which is the credit insurance market, that is the only market in the world that is not traded on an exchange. Why is that why is that a secret market?
Because people make a ton of money there, and they don't want to regulate.
Come on, that's not really the reason.
Sure it is. They make
so you're saying that the politicians, because people make a ton of money, keep a secret $700 trillion.
The
president has authorized this.
This is the cesspool that you and I and many others, of course, understand has driven so much of what is corrupt out there. And you have asked the most critical question, which is, what purpose does it serve? Now, there's most of the other markets you talked about are there to create a capital-raising function, so money goes to businesses that will create products and jobs, the whole bit. So much of the swap market, the credit markets, now are revolving around these arcane products that don't do anything other than permit people to bet in a casino without having any real social utility. And so you ask the question, why are we even supporting it? And wouldn't we do better just to eliminate it? And in fact, my good friend Dick Grasso has proposed that.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about that. I asked Dick Grasso. He used to run the New York Stock Exchange. He knows about securities, obviously. He knows about how to create marketplaces for securities. And I said, Dick, how do we deal with the swaps? This is crazy. Right? I still am kind of stuck on the fact that you really believe that the only reason the swaps market exists is because they're paying off the government. But listen, you're right. You're right.
Let me add a footnote. There are some swaps, and some piece of it is hugely important.
Hugely important.
But not when you're talking about the size that you're talking about. A lot of it is just gambling on other people's houses, whether it's going to burn down. Not a useful thing.
And your friend and mine, Richard Grasso, makes the point that we can distinguish between mission-critical swaps that are smoothing out and facilitating energy, food, other mission-critical things around the world, and things that are not. And here's the rule change that he suggests. He says, this is according to Dick Grasso, he says, I believe regulators should require the product, being swaps, to be registered with a central clearing agent, like an exchange or perhaps a central bank, and thus able to be monitored globally to prevent contracts being written in excess of the debt obligations they're designed to ensure. He goes on to say, this is easily accomplished by regulators and Treasury issuing a cross-markets rule adopted by non-U.S. counterparties. So this is a rule change. This is at the Treasury. This is the most interesting part. He says any contracts that are in that second category, non-mission critical, non-real, basically, any contracts written outside of these requirements would be deemed null and void by regulators as simply online gaming. Is that online gaming?
It seems to me it is. And in fact, this issue has been addressed by some state regulators who in the past, back when credit default swaps and all this stuff that we had never heard of before 07, 08 suddenly exploded and metastasized, they said, what are these products? And in fact, should they be prohibited as violative of state laws that prohibit online gaming? It's not a crazy thought. I think Dick is onto something. He and I have had our battles in the past, obviously, but I think here he is exactly right. What he's really saying is if these products don't serve a purpose, get rid of them.
What do you think the chances are we could get Eliot Spitzer and Dick Grasso together to say that?
100%. We've had dinner before. We'll do it again.
Wonderful. Listen, and thank you so much. I hope you'll continue to talk about this with us over the next few weeks.
As long as I keep telling people to buy your book, I will.
Absolutely. Eliot, thank you so much. For more ways on how we can reform the banks and encourage the right kind of greed, head to greedybastards.com. You can learn more about the sorts of breaches we're talking about. And if you haven't gotten your copy of the book yet, be sure to pick one up at your friendly neighborhood bookseller. Coming up.